excellent researcher named Hansmuk Seth, Dr. Hansmuk Seth, and he was overseeing my research at the City Palace Museum. And this is also Chelsea, who's also worked in his office. And they were very supportive of the work that I was doing. So the premise of studying these historical weapons was to get a better sense for how these weapons were made, when they were made for use. What does a sword look like and feel like, and how much does it weigh, and where is the balance point, and all of these considerations that are really no longer relevant today when we're not using swords, but they really add a much needed kind of purpose to the piece. And in my own work, I wanted to be able to make swords and daggers and collectible swords that had the feel of real historical pieces. And so that's what I wanted to do is make these documentations. So here is another example of a Tulwar hilt that I studied, and I drew all of the ornamentation that was on the hilt. Here's another example, a card. It's a dagger, a single-edged dagger, and you can see here the gold overlay. So this is the Kaftkari that I studied when I was in India as well. And Kaftkari is a technique for laying gold and silver onto steel, as it said in the description. But this is the predominant method by which these Indian arms, specifically from the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, were embellished. And almost all of them were embellished to some extent. And so I was really fascinated with learning this technique. And I also went to a bunch of museums. So this one, for those of you who have been to the Mehrangarh Fort in Jodhpur, this is in the first floor of the Mehrangarh Fort Museum. Really terrific Qatar. Here's a piece in less good condition, but you can still see the gold overlay here. And just with these number of pieces that I'm showing you here in the description, I hope you can get a sense for the variety of different patterns and embellishments that you see on these swords. This is a sword that's these two are the pair of swords that were owned by Maharana Pratap, King of Mewar, and these are in the City Palace Museum in Udaipur. And here you can see there are full-on pictures here with horses and riders and all sorts of embellishment. So I was fascinated with this. Here's one more. This is from in the museum in Bikaner, a Khanda. All right, so I wanted to learn the Kaftkari. This is the second part of my Fulbright grant. So I went to study with this man here, Sandeep Singh Chauhan in Udaipur, and his brother Rahul. So I spent time with both of these guys who were so generous to teach me how to do Kaftkari, and I worked with them for most of the time that I was in India. I would go a few days a week, and first I started out just watching them work, and eventually they allowed me to work on little practice pieces, and then finally to also do work for them on their pieces that they were putting out in production. So I have a little video here of Sandeep laying down the gold. So there are a number of steps in this process, and I'll get into the nuts and bolts of it in more detail. But this is really the key, the highest skilled portion of the process is laying down the gold, which is done very precisely. So essentially, when in order to do Kaftkari, you start by cross-hatching the surface of the steel. So you have a piece of steel, you heat it to make it blue, which gives you a little bit of contrast, and then you use this knife to cut across the whole surface in two directions. And that makes a a broad field of these tiny little, almost microscopic spikes. And then those spikes are sharp enough that when you put a really fine piece of gold or silver on top of it and press it down, it sticks. And so it sticks exactly where you want it. And so this here, Sandeep is sticking down a really fine gold wire onto that surface that he's prepared. And you can see just how fast he's able to work. I mean, these are the hands of a master craftsman. He's been doing this work ever since he was a kid. And this particular step of the process, the drawing essentially, articulating the design that's going to go on the weapon, that's the part that's done by the most skilled craftsmen. Oftentimes, the people who are learning, the apprentices, will do just the cross hatching for even years before they're ready to start laying any gold or silver. And then when they're ready to start laying gold and silver, they do the filling process. So it's like a coloring, like coloring on a coloring book, like you did as a kid, basically. So after all of these designs are put onto the steel, then somebody needs to go in and fill them in with little bits of wire. And so that's what the second level of apprentices do. And then eventually, once you're a master, then you do this part of the process. You can just watch the efficiency of his motion, really expertly laying down this gold. I think most of us probably couldn't even draw that quickly. So I spent a good amount of time watching Sandeep and Rahul and their work. And I also got some tutelage from their father, Mohan Singh Ji, who gave me some good advice when it came to the cross hatching, and I watched him work. He was mostly retired from Kaftkari, but I think the fact that I was there and studying made him excited about it again, and so he started to pick it up again while I was there. All right, so I'll pause here on this photo. Here's some of my early attempts at Kaftkari. You can see the kind of haphazard scratches on the left-hand side over here. These are some of my early attempts at the cross hatching. And then you can see my placing down the silver in this case. And it's fairly ragged, but it's kind of getting where it needs to go. But it's a part of the learning process. And my goal for this was eventually to work it into my own work when I arrived back home. Here is a Talwar hilt that was done by, again, Sandeep and Rahul's father, Mohan Singh Ji, and I was doing the coloring portion that I mentioned. So Mohan did all of the outlines here that you can see on the left-hand side. So all the leaves and flowers are open with no gold in the middle. And then he had me do all of the filling work. So I'd lay in little wires side by side in each of these leaves to fill in the gold and make it a solid block so that it really pops off the steel. And this was a really good practice project for me because I got to lay a lot of wire and have a lot of experience, get a lot of experience with this particular technique. So I also did two collaboration projects when I was in India. I wanted to make a knife with Sandeep and make a knife with Rahul and have their really high quality Kaftkari work incorporated in these knives. And I did two of these. And chef knives are one of my specialties in my business. And so I decided to make chef knives. It was also something they were interested in learning and more about. So I created this knife. You can see it's a photo montage, three of the same knife. And this was all Sandeep's work, Sandeep's gold work. I actually helped him a little bit with the filling, and I did the cross hatching, the preparation of the ground, but he did all of the gold outlining, and you can see his signature here. Here's a close-up of Sandeep's gold work. And this knife is one that I made 100% in India. Here's another example, another photograph. And here's the knife that I made with Rahul. It's a really elegant geometric pattern that really fills the space. And You can see his signature there. He decided to sign it in English. But I was really proud to make these pieces in collaboration with my masters, and I feel like it was a token of my gratitude to them to kind of incorporate their skills with mine in these pieces. So when I got back home, I was determined to eventually start working on it on my own. I still had a lot of practice to do. I was still not very good at Kafkari, but the first piece that I was felt when I felt I was satisfactory at this process, I this is the first piece that I did, which is actually the bread knife that Mrinalini talked about. And so here you can see starting to work on some of my own motifs that are less Indian, but still Indian inspired. I have the sunflower and wheat motif on this bread knife, for instance. All right, so here we were moving into all of the work that I did coming after returning from India. And this is a hunting knife that I made in June of 2023. So about 7 months after returning from India. This is another piece that I made. This one uses a very Indian design for the motif that I'm using. And actually, I took this directly out of a book. So I found a book with a historic Indian gun in it, and this gun had this exact gold motif in one of the bands that secured the barrel to the stock. And so I decided to put that same motif on the knife. And again, copying and drawing from historical pieces is a really great way to learn and digest the technique so that you can apply it in your own work. And so this was something that I was eager to do, is using these historical designs, incorporating them into a modern knife design, in this case, a hunting knife. Here's the knife in its full completion. So after doing these two pieces, but then I also taught a little class in Kafkari. I decided to go and teach at a school in Maine and teach some Americans about this technique. And this was a little example piece that I did while in the class. Again, experimenting with other motifs. This one is a abstracted wild strawberry design with the three leaves and the five petal flowers. But the real milestone piece of 2023 for me was this card. And this piece I named Sojourn because for me it represents my trip to India and back. It has the very traditional Indian design of a card, the single-edged dagger, and I based this card off of two that I documented while I was working in the City Palace Museum. And it also incorporates some of my own personal design aspect. So the Damascus steel that I use in the blade is a pattern that I designed before I went to India, and the apple blossom motif in the pierced handle was inspired by the apple blossoms I found in the spring on my family's farm. So incorporating the Indian designs with the American designs and putting them all into one was something that I was really passionate about in this particular piece. And then you can see this running gold pattern here is a Persian or Mughal design, or at least inspired by those Persian and Mughal designs. Here you can see it on the very back of this hilt. So I'm going to show you a little bit of the process. So here are my hands putting down some Kaftkari. And you'll notice that I'm nowhere near as fast or as skilled as Sandeep, but I do manage to get it down in the right place. And after the gold is laid, then you burnish it. And so this is me burnishing that piece. which is for Sojourn. You haven't seen this piece in a final photo yet because this is the scabbard. So this is the tip for the scabbard for Sojourn. All of my gold work. Again, very Persian and Mughal inspired design with these sweeping scrolls and leaves. And here you can see some close-ups. And here's Sojourn with its scabbard in its entirety. All right, so I have a couple of other pieces that I worked on. This is made around the same time as Sojourn. These were both made for the Art Knife Invitational show in Las Vegas. And this one I call Morning Glory because it has Morning Glory leaves and flowers all over the two fittings that go in the handle and on the scabbard as well, as you'll see. And this is a combination of silver and gold Kaftkari, which you see from time to time in Indian work, and it really allows you to add depth to a piece. And again, this is departing from the very traditional Indian styles, but these flowers could be easily found on historic Indian pieces. The leaves are a little bit different than what you might see, but the same broad aesthetic of covering the whole surface and working inside a border is all very traditional and something that I carried consciously into my own work. And here is Morning Glory in its entirety, and you can see with my Western stylized Morning Glories on the sheath that mirror the Morning Glories that are damascened onto the Kaftkari, Kaftkari Morning Glories that are appear on the fittings. Here's another piece that I made. This one was in the early 2024. This was a collaboration with a couple of friends of mine, again with a very Western design. This is a Bowie knife or a Bowie knife, depending on where in the US you are. And it's specifically one that's inspired by Sheffield design. So it's kind of British and American, but incorporating fairly traditional Indian designs on the guard. And I like to think that it really sets this piece apart. Here you can see details of that guard. All right, so finally, I'd like to show you this piece, which is Oracle. This is the most recent of my work and probably the piece of which I'm most proud so far. And I think it does a really great job combining the techniques that are used in Indian weapons embellishment with some other sorts of modern abstraction and blade designs from around the world. This is really ahistorical. It's completely a fictitious piece, but I feel like it has the feel of a dagger that was designed for a very specific purpose. So the stretch that I made on this particular piece it's not the hilt where the Kaftkari is not steel. So traditionally Kaftkari is done on steel or iron, which are, steel is a basically an iron alloy, iron and carbon together. But the iron base is usually quite important for Kaftkari, and I decided I was going to try it on bronze. Bronze is obviously it's a copper alloy. There's no iron in it. But I found that it actually worked quite satisfactorily, and I didn't have to change the process very much at all. So here I'm going to walk you through the process from start to finish. This is how Kaftkari is done. Again, I'm doing it on bronze here, but the same would be true. The same technique would be used on steel. So you start by scoring the surface with a knife. This is the cross-hatching technique. And this is, I haven't talked about it much because it's really the non-glamorous portion of Kaftkari, but it's one of the most important steps because without a very dense, uniform set of scratches going in two directions, the gold simply won't stick to the metal. Or even worse, it'll stick well enough to get it finished, but then a year or 2 years down the road, the gold will start to flake off and fall off. And that's not what you want for a high-end piece, especially say a sword that historically would have been carried into battle. You want that gold to be indelibly locked onto the steel. And so making sure that the cross hatching is uniform and clean from the beginning is really of utmost importance. After the cross hatching, then I can lay down the wires. And this is a very geometric straight line design. I only have small clips because it's actually really difficult to photograph or to video what I'm doing at such a small scale. But you can see the same wire with this little pressing tool working in these straight line designs. When I've taught classes in this technique, which I've done on a couple of occasions, I usually suggest that students start with straight lines because straight lines are easier to lay down and then gradually work into doing more curves and floral designs because they're kind of a next level of difficulty. Once all of the gold is laid exactly where you want it, then burnishing is the final step. So I take this agate stone, and with the agate stone, I rub over the entire surface. And what the agate does is it pushes the gold down onto that surface of scratches that you've created and locks it into place. It also hardens the gold a little bit, makes it shiny, makes it spread out a little bit. And then eventually it also pushes down all of the rest of the little points and all the rest of the crosshatches so that you get a more uniform background. Because when you look at these historical pieces, oftentimes you don't see a lot of crosshatching. You see just a kind of plain black background that dissolves into, dissolves into the background so that you really see the gold as the foreground. And the burnishing is part of that process. So here I'm working on the inside of this hilt after I've done all of the wire kaftgari, then I'm going to do what we call a kundan work, foil work on the inside. And this is something that I decided to use this technique because of how it's used on historical pieces in India. So oftentimes in tulwar hilts, when there's a broad flat section, the artist will cover it with wire because the wire is easy to lay down in various intricate designs. But when there's a tight inside corner or a difficult curve, they'll put down foil instead to just cover it in gold and embellish the surface, but it's a little bit easier to apply in a tight setting. And so here you can see it would be difficult to put wire in the center of this handle, but instead I'm putting foil to have this shiny inside of the hilt. Now this is silver foil that I'm applying here, and you might be confused as to why I'm putting silver foil when the final piece is gold. And this was another trick that I learned from Rahul and Sandeep, is that if you want to make gold be really vibrant on the surface, you put 2 layers of it. Or you can do 1 layer of silver and 1 layer of gold, and you spend half of the money on gold, but it makes it just as vibrant. You can see I'm trimming off the excess after burnishing down that silver. And then I applied gold over top of it. So with the foil work, it's a little bit different than wire. You cut the piece first, and then with tweezers, you apply the really fine gold to the surface and burnish it down. Here you see that piece coming together. And the fact that the silver is underneath the gold makes that surface all the more vibrant. In the final process, you heat it slightly and then burnish it, same as you would with wire Kashgari. So here's the heating process with the torch. And then I'll burnish using the agate stone to make it all shiny. And there's the mostly finished handle. Just needs a little bit of final polish work on the patina. But all the gold work is done. And here you can see the finished piece. Here's that gold on the bronze. I've tried to darken the bronze as much as possible. I think one of the reasons this is not historically done on bronze is that the contrast between gold and bronze is not nearly as good as the contrast between gold and black and steel. But if you're able to put a chemical patina on the bronze to get it to a dark color, then you can get just as good a contrast or nearly as good a contrast. This one had some nature inspiration. This piece is called Oracle, and I was kind of inspired by a canopy of a tree, wanting to evoke that in the pommel of this dagger. You can see more of that gold work. And here is Oracle on its stand. Final piece. Right. So hang on. Can you see? There we go. So I should be back to here. So thanks for taking this little trip through all of my my recent work. So I guess the to conclude, I'd like to talk about kind of what's next. What do I do now with this, the rest of my career with this Kafkari and the relation to India and the so essentially, I think that last piece, Oracle, is really the beginning of a new wave in my use of Kafkari and Indian techniques, and really kind of trying to integrate them as closely into my own work as possible. I don't feel that I want to imitate Indian styles in my own work anymore, really. I think I did to a certain extent at the beginning because I wanted to really get a sense for the artistic, the design elements and the techniques. And I think it was incredibly valuable to spend those 9 months in India studying these historical pieces. And now I want to take it to a new level and work it in with the kind of themes that I want to explore in my own work. You know, this idea of oracle of the being able to tell the future, you know, the more artistic, abstract expression in my work. I also would love to find a way to expose more of the world to the techniques of Kafkari, specifically to help out the artists that I found and worked with in India. I mean, I feel incredibly grateful to have had the experience to spend time with all of those people and to learn their techniques. And I would love for the world as a whole to know more about what they do and hopefully purchase it as well to support those traditional craftsmen who are carrying on this skill. Really, Kafkari used to be done all over the Middle East and India, and now it's pretty much done just in the city of Udaipur. So it's what many would consider a dying art, but I think there's a great future for it in making these really phenomenal collector's pieces and art for this new generation. So thank you all for your time and for joining me. And I would love to open up the floor to questions for anybody who's interested in uh, any other aspects of this craft.
I have a question. Most of the craftsmen, or they learn under an apprentice model, like someone who goes and lives with the family or generation to generation, while you were different, going from here. How do you describe your experience? Was it any problem?
That's actually a really good point. So, yeah, as Rahul was saying, most of these craftsmen who are involved in really any trade, but in Kafkari specifically, they learned from their parents. So Rahul and Sandeep, who I worked with, they both learned from their father, who taught them at a young age. And it meant that their teaching style was quite different than I was used to. So as an American coming in, wanting to learn this craft in 9 months, I was maybe anticipating something more like the classes that I teach in knife making. When I teach a knife making class, I get my students for 3 days, and I need to teach them how to make a knife in 3 days. And so I'm very deliberate about explaining every aspect. Okay, here's how I'm moving my hammer. Here's how, here are the design decisions that I'm making along the way, and trying to put words to every single step that I'm doing. And Rahul and Sandeep were not that way at all in their teaching. They really wanted me just to observe and then try it. And I remember Mohan Ji. He was when I was learning how to do the cross hatching. I did my first coupon. I had a blank that was about an inch wide and 4 inches long, and I had to cover the whole thing with cross hatches. And he didn't speak a word of English, and I found his Hindi quite difficult to understand as well. And but he took my first example, and he looked at it, and he shook his head, and he brought it over to the grinder and ground off the whole surface, and brought it back to me and said, "Do it again." And so I did that, and that was very much the traditional way of learning. Is
Mhm.
you try it and you fail, and then you try it again. And so as as I progressed, I would kind of make notes to myself of, okay, this is exactly how I'm holding my hand, and this is what works, and this is what doesn't. And I would try to ask as many questions along the way of Rahul and Sandeep, like when you are moving the stylus down the wire, are you rocking it or are you sliding it? What is the motion? And trying to put words to it for myself, because that's how I learn, which is a little bit different from how it was traditionally taught. But I think
Thank
that
you.
answers the question.
So I guess I have a question for you. Hi, Jordan. It's so good to see you, and it's so good to hear like what you've done since your Fulbright. Um, have you had any issues sourcing materials since getting back? It looks like you brought the tools over, but like the gold wire, stuff like that, is that commercially available here, or do you have to make it yourself? And did you learn how to do that on your Fulbright?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, I was not able to learn how to make the wire on my Fulbright. Apparently, there's just one craftsman in all of Udaipur who makes the wire for all the Kaftkari artists. And and I think he's uh, kept a little bit in secret, or I wasn't able to I wasn't able to go and see his workshop, unfortunately. But the first couple pieces that I made with wire that I brought home from India. So that solved that issue for me, because I was able to use Indian material. And I actually did order some wire through Rahul. He was able to send me some in the mail. But I did finally find a source for wire in the United States, and there the wire that they sell is quite a bit more expensive than the stuff that I could get in India. But when you factor in shipping, it's about the same anyway. So yes, I did finally find a supplier for the tools. I mean, I'm a blacksmith, so making the tools for Kafgari has never been an issue for me. I'm used to just making my own tools for whatever process I need. If someone were to try to learn this craft and not have the skills of being a blacksmith, then they would need to source the tools, and it would be a little bit more difficult. I know that Rahul and Sandeep. So since I've been back and teaching classes and talking about this technique, I know a bunch of American smiths who are interested in learning, and I know a number of them have purchased tools directly from Rahul and Sandeep, who send them over in the mail. And so that's still a very viable option for people who want to get into the craft, is they can just order the tools from India. But I've always just made my own.
I have a question. Hi. So good to see you
Yes.
also.
Oh, hey, Tanya.
Yeah, for like Kaftagari art in India, like I know you said that it's like unfortunately like kind of a dying tradition or like a dying craft, but like currently like what is the typical buyer like? Like who are the typical people that are like still interested in like purchasing like Kaftagari art or like these blades?
Yeah. Well, so in my experience, there are three primary markets for Kafkari. The first is uh, there is a lot of fairly low quality silver work that goes to Arab countries, Saudi Arabia and Jordan and the UAE, and it's sold as tourist tourist items, uh, kind of trinkets, small daggers with silver work on them that are sold fairly cheaply. And a lot of that work is done in Udaipur. So that's one market for it. The market for the slightly higher end stuff is European and Chinese collectors of antiques. There's a lot of new work that's passed off as antique, and a lot of, and that's a big market for some of these artists. And then there is a smaller market for high quality new work from India, mostly from wealthy collectors within India. Indian craftspeople, unfortunately, are working with a disadvantage in the global market, in that there's a bias against Indian craftsmanship. The the kind of common narrative about Indian work is it's cheap and quick and it's not high quality. And unfortunately, it's kind of a self-perpetuating cycle, because it means that people in, say, Europe or America are not willing to pay high amounts of money for a new high quality piece made in India. And so they try to talk down the price. And when you talk down the price, then the quality of the work goes down again. And so there's that part of the reason that Kafkari is dying is that the market more globally is it's not a favorable market for collectors to buy things from India.
I have a question. Is there a potential role for the Fulbright, interest group association in marketing or supporting? I don't know. I know it's not part of a mandate, but just thinking aloud.
That's a really interesting idea. I mean, I think there's a possibility that there would be, um, and I'm sure that there are a lot of other crafts that would very much benefit or want that sort of support. I mean, no matter who I talked to, whether it was the leather workers or the uh, you know other craftspeople, but mostly leather workers and metal workers, is who I talked with in India. They were always, and the painters as well. They were always asking me, "Oh, well, can you sell this in America? Can you know how to, can you help us find a bigger market?" And it's still something that I mull over in the back of my head, but I haven't found the time and inspiration to dedicate myself to really putting together a marketplace for that sort of thing. But I think there is a chance that say the Fulbright interest group, or even just a single motivated individual could make a difference in that
For
field.
example, in the flyer, you could put a small section, advertising ethically made handicrafts in India or something of that sort.
Yes.
It might go to thousands of people.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. Yeah, definitely keep that in mind and keep those discussion going.
Hmm. Thank you.
Hey Jordan, I got a question.
Yes.
Are you planning on doing more classes in the US? And do you have links in your bio for buying those knives and things such as that from the guys over in India?
I don't have links in my bio specifically, but I can certainly forward the Instagram and I believe they also sell on Etsy. The Instagram and Etsy shops of the craftsman that I was working with, and so that would be the good place to go. Uh, I'll maybe put those in the comments. Their Instagram handles. In terms of classes that I'm teaching in the US, I don't have any on the calendar currently. I've kind of held off after that first class, which was fairly successful. I've held off because I want to really develop an effective curriculum, and there are a couple of challenges to designing a curriculum and figuring out where the space is going to be and how long and how to break it up so that you're not just laying gold wire all day every day. I mean, it's best done in small increments. An evening class would be great if somebody, but I don't live in a metro area where you could teach something like that. So it's more difficult to do it in a concerted 3 day or a week long class.
Jordan, do you anticipate having a studio with apprentices, or maybe you already do, where you're increasing your output, or is it still just you making one piece or a limited number of pieces at a time?
For right now, it's really just me making a limited number of pieces at a time. I think hopefully in the next couple of years, I'll be making a little bit more volume. I mean, I specifically the things that I'm putting Kafgari on, the really high end collector's pieces, those are always just going to be me. I also, part of my business, I mean, I make knives for a living, and most of my work is not covered in gold. And I do have a product line of kitchen knives that I'm working on that hopefully I'll be able to enlist some help with. But for now, it's just me.
Hey, Mr. Jordan, I wanted to ask real quick, whenever you're designing a piece with Kafgari, will you often kind of reserve it for things that have symmetrical designs, or will you utilize it pretty much with any motif, if that makes sense? Like what kind of thought process do you have whenever you're designing a piece that's going to utilize Kafgari?
Hmm, that's a good question. You know, Kafgari is as as a technique can be used for as many different motifs as you can think of. I mean, it can you can have repeating kind of geometric designs that cover an area, or you can have one scroll that works through an asymmetric shape. So I would say that there's really no limit to what you can do with it. It doesn't have to be symmetrical for sure. Um, I in terms of my own thought process, I usually think thematically these days about, okay, what do I want to achieve with this Kafgari? Do I want to evoke some specific, or do I want to reference some specific thing in real life, a flower or a tree or even a specific species of plant? Or do I want to be a little bit more broad? In the case of oracle, which has this, well, oracle is a Greek word. So and it has this idea of being able to tell the future or the obscurity of the future. I incorporated this sort of maze labyrinthine motif to hint at that theme. But I think it can really be as broad as you like.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Jordan.
I would say, oh yes, sure.
Sorry. So I know Kaftkar in India is very traditional, and I know you're using more mo like more modern themes in your own work. Have you considered maybe having someone in India who might be interested in changing the style with which they do koftagari to be like an apprentice for you instead of like through your teachers, Rahul and I forget the other person's name. Like maybe somebody in India who might be interested in like changing up the traditional work and doing some modern like craftsmanship there as well.
That would be fascinating. Yeah, I would absolutely be open to an opportunity like that. I mean, the difficulty with all of that sort of thing is funding. You know, if somebody can, it's of course much more difficult for people from India to come to the United States as it, you know, than it is for me to go to India. But
That could be something, maybe if you want to do another Fulbright, you could work that angle.
I think that could be really fascinating. Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate these ideas.
So do we have any more questions? Maybe a couple more, if there are any more.
I have a question. Hi, Jordan. It was great seeing your work in Manhattan a few months ago.
Oh, thanks.
I had a question on the dying art part that you mentioned. I know you said that it's really only constrained to Udaipur at this point, and I know with a lot of arts in India that are dying, one problem is that younger people are not really interested in taking it up. So have you found that younger craftsmen in Udaipur are working on it, or it's still mostly constrained to older people?
You know, I have found there are a few younger craftsmen in India who were doing it, but I would say most of the people who were doing the craft were kind of middle-aged in my experience. I mean, there are some older people as well. Not a lot of very young people picking up Kafkari. There is an interesting, so there is also a real resurgence in interest in Kafkari, specifically in metalwork and the craft of weapons within the Sikh community. And I have met some younger Sikh men who are interested in learning Kafkari, and just because of the significance that weaponry still holds within that tradition. So those were most of the young people that I met. And actually, so when I was in Udaipur toward the end of my grant, we had a Metals in Mewar conference that was put on by the City Palace Museum. Dr. Hansmukh Seth kind of put this conference together, and one of the attendees was a man from Punjab who was really a Sikh man who was very interested in trying to learn all of these techniques and make his own really highly embellished swords. So I think that may be where the craft survives the strongest in the future.
Cool. Thank you.
Jordan, I had another question. Would you ever, you mentioned about the difficulty of teaching a class. Would you ever consider doing like an online academy, even if it was like a pay-per-view course, but something online where you could sit down and show it in great detail under microscopic view?
You know, I have, and what I really want is for Rahul and Sandeep to make that, because I think they should be the ones to teach that class. You know, part of the old, you know, there's also, you know, for me personally, I want to make sure that I'm as respectful of and as supportive of the people who taught me and the tradition from which this comes, because, you know, I obviously studied and learned a lot, but I don't want to leave them out of the loop in the educational process. So I think, you know, one day maybe collaborating with Sandeep and Rahul to have them do their videos and maybe layer in some of my discussions, because I have a lot of experience with teaching specifically and explaining the process. I think it could be a good collaborative process. I would love to put together something like that.
That would
But
be really
I don't
cool.
have
Thank
any
you.
immediate plans to do that yet. Anybody else?
Yeah,
I have a comment. My brother-in-law works with the Firearms Engravers Guild of America. And I
Yeah.
wonder if you've had any contact with them
I
with
have
your
not.
knife work.
Yeah, I've not had any contact with the Firearms Engravers Guild specifically. I do know a number of engravers, and learning that style of engraving is certainly high on my list of things to do to apply to my own art. And the technique of Kafgari is somewhat similar to some of the techniques that are used by some of the top engravers in the US as well, but a little bit different in the nuances. The Indian folks generally use a lot finer wire, and the use of a knife to crosshatch instead of a chisel is is unique.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. We just have a few minutes left, and Jordan, if we'd be happy to if you want to share your link to your newsletter, I think that'd be one way for people to connect with you. I love looking at all the new products you put out there. And yes, I do drool at them every time. I keep showing my husband, yeah, we should get one of those. But and I really do appreciate how you're making that transition and doing, exactly what the Fulbright mission is about, is that cultural exchange and then bringing cultures together with your work, as you are doing so now. Thank you so much for your time. If I can just take a couple of minutes to share just a few links for those who would be interested in helping out with the fire effort and helping out with the recovery and relief in Southern California at the moment. Now, if I could just figure out how to share. Hold on one second, sorry. Sure. So here are some Team Rubicon helps with rebuilding. These are all different places that y'all can send donations to. Samaritan's Purse is for people with recovery. There's the Salvation Army. There's the Pasadena Humane Society. Y'all might have seen videos of animals just being abandoned or getting left behind, just lost and wandering. They could definitely use a lot of help. Cal Fund is the firefighters organization, and they use their donations for helping with the recovery effort also. And I can't remember what WCK was. But the LA Times, actually, this is a good link to go to, and they have descriptions of the different organizations and links and different ways that you can help out. So you might want to just check that out also if you all want to help out. Thank you everybody so much for being here with us. We will upload the link to the recording. We will upload the recording on our YouTube channel, and I will send it out via a newsletter also. If you are not if we don't have your email address already, just go ahead and share it with us, and so that you can get the link to the recording also. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate y'all being here.
Indeed. Thank you all for coming, and thank you so much, Mrinalini and the rest of the India Interest Group, Fulbright India Interest Group, for putting on this series. I think I'm the second in a list of lots of really great speakers, so definitely tune into the other ones that will be coming in the coming months.
Yeah, and if y'all want to, share your work, please do reach out to us and let us know. And we can arrange a presentation for you also. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan.